Welcome back to the second episode of the introduction. I am Jorius,
And I'm Silas.
and we will be continuing our conversation, almost picking up where we left off from last time.
Yeah, being as loaded with context that we had to introduce as an introduction would be. We labeled it Intro to Hermeticism 1 for a reason. And we're not even really going over anything super different, but some elaboration would probably be useful for anyone who tuned in to the last episode. And if you haven't watched that one, I would recommend watching that first. If you have, we were actually
Relevant
pretty.
information in that, yeah.
Yeah, relevant because we're just going to assume that it was that you're picking off at the same point that we did, and we were actually pretty pleasantly surprised by the reception that episode got.
Yes, thank you all for the support. That was our first episode, and to see it get so much activity just a couple days or so after uh, it uploaded, it's a really good motivating factor for us to keep going here.
Yeah, and not to spend too much time on this, but like right off the bat, we got a few subscribers, lots of comments that we'd love to respond to. At our own pace, because some of the things that you guys want to know about will probably cover entire episodes on their own, maybe more. So
And right
just
now,
seeing the views go up, yeah, that was pretty
in such a short
special, I
time
think.
too, yeah.
Hmm.
So thank you all for that. But right now we will be specifying more on our more general topics of last time, but we're still probably going to have to keep it pretty general for the intro.
Yeah, and so it was almost too general how I said the last time that when you enter I feel like it's a fair question to ask. How does one get introduced to magic? Usually you get the image that maybe someone gets initiated, but it's not quite like that. Like they get initiated into an order, or somebody who knows more than they do initiates them and takes them on as a student teacher kind of relationship. But it's almost it can be like that, and that's a good buffer. That's a way that we use to control it so that we can actually make sure that those people glean some useful knowledge instead of being all on their own. But in reality, remember when I said that m- mystics in society occur whether you really want them to or not, and whether they need to or not.
Yeah, it's a force.
Because
It's described. You described it as a force of nature. I
it's
described
a
it as a
force of
flowing
nature.
process that sort of just happens
Hmm.
over time as the religions and traditions tend to evolve.
Right. Lots of people react to it like it's a sixth sense, which is where that comes from. It's a sense that they can't prove to anybody who doesn't have that sense. Um, but maybe they were born always having some strange experiences, and maybe they always had different thoughts about the world, and that's enough to make it so that mysticism and the channel of magic that gets carried on between people in an oral tradition is caught like measles. It's almost like a virus, the way that, and without the connotation that a virus comes with it. It's almost like a virus in the way that it's not really a voluntary thing, but what is voluntary is how you react to it and what you choose to learn and do with that information, and whether you even want to engage with it or not.
Yeah, and another question you'll have to ask yourself is how far are you willing to actually take yourself out of contemporary conventional society?
Yeah, because this is something that I learned after I really started getting through the steps of the traditions. Is I realized that a lot of people, like way more than you would even think, are aware of these things and simply pretend not to be. Not even in the sense that maybe they subscribe to more orthodox spiritual belief, although that does happen because those orthodox beliefs like Christianity really are kind of cover all your bases. Um, Philosophies that can keep you safe if you feel that you've been put in danger by these kinds of channels, as I keep describing them. This involuntary reaction to encountering the supernatural or mystic, whatever you want to call it, the magical. It has to, as you what you start to realize is that people go into this all the time and then they pull out. So maybe they had a passing fascination.
Yeah,
Maybe during the 90s they were part of
almost
a
like
pagan religion.
a kid putting their hand on the burner
Yeah,
and they
a
jolt
lot of
back.
people do get. Yeah, a lot of people get scared by it, and then they will continue on life as if that was none of that experience was legitimate, and that's fully their prerogative. Um, that's why you don't assume that you know more than somebody else, because for all you know, this person is more, uh, technically more experienced than you. It's just maybe they ended up encountering magic and then stepping away from it and wanting nothing to do with it again.
And the power of social pressure and social cohesion too is very great. And that's one of the major things that actually keeps the major religions going.
Right. I will say that people who get into magic tend to make leaps and bounds in whatever discipline or science that they are in, but no matter how you go about it, you are going against the grain of societal conventions. There's going to be an element of that that you're never going to get other people, at least not everybody. If you're lucky, you get like a few people who really understand you and like they can relate to you in the way that you're now seeing the world, but don't count on that being the kind of thing that you can just bring to other people. It hasn't happened um, with the
Yeah,
ancient
it's like love.
Hermetics.
You can't really force it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You know, don't assume that anybody would want to be a part of that because honestly, I think that's where the trouble comes in is when people start being too open about their new ideas, and maybe they overstep the bounds of what they know, and they end up causing friction between themselves and other people and society at large because there are a lot of ways that you can go about this where you have no idea what you're talking about, and God knows we try to like fact check and fact check and fact check and make sure we know everything that we possibly can to avoid giving false information.
Yeah, and at some point, we most likely will run into a glass door and accidentally give out some false information. I think it's just like it's inevitable, but we do our best to either go back on those things, correct them, or redo them entirely if necessary.
Mm-hmm. Um, People learn and unlearn things in magic all the time. Discernment is such an essential part of the practice.
Very looked over.
Very looked over because the history and the information is fragmented and manipulated beyond all measure of the imagination throughout history by various interests and uh, various people and various, frankly, just wrong ideas about what should be done with it. And so you probably will end up getting something wrong. You probably will.
And
It's
it's natural
almost definitely
to.
a mistake. It's expected, yeah. It's absolutely expected. And it's not dangerous.
And just to go back a little bit on what we were saying earlier about people who understand the gnosis behind their traditions, but they understand how like controversial that is. So some people get it, but others you could show them the truth, like slap them around with the truth, and they will not understand. So here's a little excerpt I want to read off from the Kabbalion that sort of explains this. The Kabbalion striving to give you the working principles, leaving you to apply them yourselves, rather than attempting to work out the teaching in detail. If you are a true student, you will be able to work out and apply these principles. If not, then you must develop yourself into one, for otherwise the Hermetic teachings will be as words, words, words to you.
Yeah, you ever heard somebody say, like, if you don't understand the metaphors of the language, it just sounds like words? Well, here's somebody like, when was the Kabbalion written?
It's supposed to be the 1930s by William
Mhm.
Atkinson,
So something that long ago, somebody was saying the exact same thing.
but
Um,
the Kabbalion is like inspired from works like the Hermetica, which essentially say the same thing.
exactly. Because I'll read another excerpt from a book that I quoted on the last episode called Alchemy by Titus Burckhardt, and it's on page 28. It says essentially the same thing, just to drive home the point. Another reason why alchemical doctrine hides itself in riddles is because it is not meant for everyone. The quote royal art presupposes a more than ordinary understanding, and also a certain caste of soul, failing which its practice may involve no small dangers for the soul. It is not recognized, writes Artepius, a famous alchemist of the Middle Ages, that ours is a cabalistic art. By this I mean that it is passed on orally, and is full of secrets. But you, poor deluded fellow, are you so simple as to believe that we would clearly and openly teach the greatest and most important of all secrets, with the result that you would take our words literally? I assure you in good faith, for I am not as jealous as other philosophers, that whoever would take literally what the other philosophers, that is, the other alchemists, have written, will lose himself in the recesses of a labyrinth from which he will never escape, for want of Ariadne's thread to keep him on the right path and bring him safely out. And Synesios, who probably lived in the 4th century AD, writes, the true alchemists only express themselves in symbols, metaphors, and similes, so that they can only be understood by sane sages and souls endowed with understanding. For this reason they have observed in their works a certain way and a certain rule, of such a kind that the wise man may understand and perhaps after some stumbling attain to everything that is secretly described therein. Finally, Geber, who resumes the whole of medieval alchemical science in his Summa, declares, one must not explain this art in obscure words only. On the other hand, one must not explain it so clearly that all may understand it. I therefore teach it in such a way that nothing will remain hidden to the wise man, even though it may strike mediocre minds as quite obscure. The foolish and the ignorant, for their part, will understand none of it at all. So these guys kind of had an attitude, right? So you
Yeah,
can sense the sarcasm oozing off of their words, more or less. But this is how they view themselves.
and these
Um,
people, information was kind of more tightly wound up or like woven, interwoven together.
right. I
The
think a big
ancients did this almost perfectly, to my knowledge anyway. And
right.
the Kabbalion also says that transcendental chemistry, called alchemy, transcendental astronomy, called astrology, and transcendental psychology, called mystic psychology. These are things that people like Titus like already knew, and it was
Mm.
already like interwoven in the traditions that they were a part of. But it's not like that in the present day.
I think a big reason for that is the reason I think that we can do this openly is the internet changed a lot when it came to the flow of information. So back in, any other time you may have come across this information, the reason they had initiation rituals was because they were being extremely careful who they taught these practices to. And that's because magic is a tool that works no matter how pure your intentions are or how wicked they are. Um, there's people say that there's karma involved and that just stops bad things from happening. Um, from my experience, that's not necessarily the case. I've seen both good and bad things done with traditional practices that would be considered supernatural, and how much credence you want to owe to those things, that's entirely up to you. But the reason I think that we should talk about these things openly is because the floodgates, the Pandora's box of magic has already been opened by the internet. Because you can pretty much look up anything that you want. So we might as well try to refine the information and make it accessible, understandable, and as informed as possible. Because I said before in the last episode that we sort of it's kind of inevitable that we've sort of entered a new golden age of magic and hermetics, because within the last few years alone you can see that interest has skyrocketed. In fact, I think in the UK they're starting a new college course on this, magic and occult sciences, so it's becoming legitimized and it's becoming a new point of fascination for people.
Yeah, and stuff like Wicca has also contributed to the modern popularization.
Hugely. And so I said butterfly effect before, in regards to how we, as the first people entering this golden age of information, would affect future people who would want to also come into this. This is something that matters to me. But Jorius, you said there's something that you like to say every now and then, just to like remind us both of. What was that?
The "We Are the Ancients" line.
Yeah.
We are the ancients.
We are the ancients.
Yeah, so this is something I said. Well, originally it was, I don't know, about a couple months or a few months or so ago, but just yesterday, I reminded Silas here about just what our relationship between the ancients and its lineage really is, and it's really like, when you think about it, like a millennia, that's not that long. And so whenever I say something like "we are the ancients," I don't really mean that we are old nobility or we are those emperors, or even if we are living in that time, but we're living in a time that would, shit, I'm losing my,
Undoubtedly like have a humongous effect.
yeah, yeah.
I
And-
would take
Yeah,
sorry, go on. Okay. I would take back my old statement. It's not so much a butterfly effect, it's more of a ripple effect, because when you're the first to do anything, you're the first to inform the next people. And we're not the first, but in this new absolute flooding of information, yes, this is the first time that humanity has had to deal with that kind of renaissance on this scale when it comes to magic. So there's not really a way that you can contribute or participate in this that doesn't have huge ramifications or implications for how it's practiced in the future. And I think that's why people need to be super careful. That's why I, your unethical practitioners are especially consequential these days, probably more than they were before, because that's what people are learning. Like, you, for every one person that you have who's doing something corrupt with their practice, you probably have a few, assuming they're on the internet and they're public with it, you probably have at least a few hundred people who are learning that from them.
Yeah, and I would say with the internet, there's a ton of, I would say, like trickster entities. So like people who are just want you to believe a certain thing for their own personal gain, so you follow them.
Yeah, productization of the craft does occur. Um, there is a relationship between capital and practicing magic, but that would be with anything that you made an example of. Anything that you participate in can get corrupted by monetary gain.
Yeah,
But
just
it's
to
a
show that
factor.
example a little bit, televangelists and
Mm,
people who are like commercial fortune tellers or psychics, they're essentially both just as greedy, and they
right.
both try to sell you your own belief system.
Like selling a treatment and not a cure.
Yeah,
Somebody who really wanted to help you would probably, try to teach you the ways to take it into your own hands. They would want to see you bother to try to do your own divination, or they would want to see you bother to learn um, your own way and your own belief system as you navigate. But somebody who is selling you a treatment will want you to keep coming back.
yeah. So you donate to them or whatever it is.
Mhm. And so you wouldn't really get a definitive answer out of the people who would stand to make the most money off of it. And that's just one example of like what to look for as far as false teachers um, of any craft. And that's not to say that I personally know some really good psychic readers that operate in my area who I actually do have a lot of respect for. That's not to say that you can't really even do it as a service. Would I take it as a service? No, because more or less, it's not really something that I need. But the fact that it exists, the fact that you can buy crystals at a shop, medallions with, cool hermetic designs on them, I think that's pretty neat.
So we were talking just before we got recording about what the difference between Hermeticism and mysticism is, and
Mysticism. Mm,
we
yes.
got to the point where we answered that with, in a way, magic tends to birth religion with its obscure terms. And personally, I think with how intertwined Hermeticism and mysticism is, there you could almost see them as the same thing, uh, because of how accurate the Hermetic axioms are in the practical world. It makes a set, like it basically makes a Gnostic form of vocabulary terms through the Hermetic axioms.
Yeah, I would say that magic doesn't have a set of terms. I would say that it
Not
has
like a
or
set in stone form of
yeah,
terms, but the Hermetic axioms are very good guiding. They're very good guiding principles for those.
right. So magic itself is like a channel that every religion is going to try to make sense of once they figure out it exists, but it doesn't give itself a word. So like it's not really like a obscured terms. It's an obscured nature of the thing that humans are then left to their own devices to try to figure out. And so what yeah, through these axioms, whether it's hermetic or whether it's another discipline, whether it's voodoo or if it's Wicca, you can access the same source. They all access the same source.
Even the traditional religions do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even
Islam, Christianity, Hinduism,
right.
Buddhism, Taoism.
There's magic in all of those religions as well, especially in Catholicism. Just take one look at any of the ritualization of how the Catholics perform their own mass and how they handle their own energy centers, yeah, you can see there is certainly magic still alive even in uh, very
Traditional sects that oppose Gnostic
mm,
philosophy. Yeah.
yeah, and it's because they all intuitively interact with the same channel. It's a natural force, and it by I would say the difference between magic and hermeticism. I suppose you already said this, but the terms involved with hermetics provide a vocabulary um, with which you can then use to access the magic and the gnosis that's contained within all the teachers who happen to use that same language. That's why it's useful to maybe make contact with more than one tradition. Um, kind of be intellectually curious about multiple forms of magic and then treat
Yes.
it as a general thing.
In fact, participation of different models of tradition, I would say, is a good thing, at least in the beginning.
Mm.
Um, it's a good way of achieving gnosis, even if those examples that you lived your life from aren't aren't good examples. In a way that can also teach you what not to do.
Mhm. Yeah. So people people make references and metaphors and similes just like that excerpt that I read from Alchemy, what he was describing. Here's how an ancient person who's writing down their own philosophical and spiritual ideas would go about it. So alchemy became so intertwined with spirituality, despite at its bare bones being chemistry of the time. It is by all means a science that existed, and it's something that academics practice with the intent of advancing what we now know to be chemistry. And just take one look at chemistry and see how far that we've come, and you know that they did their job pretty well. But it was a suitable because that academic pursuit, people tended to be so passionate about it, and the array of terms and the way that it explained nature was so voluminous and abundant, it made a suitable metaphor all on its own for an entire magic system.
Yeah, and that kind of led to the divorced sort of schools that we have today, in which they almost see each other as opposites or as like conflicting parties, the secularists and the like Gnostics.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of funny because they're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah. And the very first examples will tell you that, I mean, you have pretty much any science or any spiritual text laden with scientific terms, whether it's astrology or cosmology or a craft of some kind or alchemy, they will tell you we are using similes and we want you to know that we are using similes and you do not take this absolutely literally or else you will get lost.
Yeah, and these are things that the Bible doesn't tell you this, the Quran doesn't tell you this. I'm not very sure about the Bhagavad Gita, but they're all
We'll cover that later.
encoded with those hermetic or mystical terms, but they don't really tell you, and they hide it. They cloak it with so much simile and symbolism that you get entire sects of people who think the entire Bible was written by God and everything was 100% true about it.
Yeah, to be taken literally and fundamentally. Um, and anyone's faith is their own business, but if you are going to go into the science of magic, and I do say deliberately the science of magic because it's treated in the real world as such, something to be studied and understood. Um, One thing that you have to do is learn how to read those similes and metaphors and allegories. You have to familiarize yourself with the language, and
Yes.
you shouldn't just focus on one, but the farther you get in one discipline while healthily exploring others, the more you'll see commonalities and the farther that you'll probably go in that one thing that you're studying.
Yeah, participating in those different models of tradition is going to give you more terms and depth uh, theologically.
Mm. And I'll give you another practical benefit for it. Something that I've experienced throughout my years of practicing in Wicca and Hermeticism, just the various things that I've explored. What I've found is that I'll tell you a story about a time that I just gave up very recently in trying to get my car fixed by mechanics. Um, I'm not somebody who would ordinarily be very fluent or affluent in mechanics, but I can become that really quickly. Um, because one thing, and I'm sure that it's a big deal to me. I'm sure that other people like learn how to fix their car, but it's something that I'm super proud of, and I know that the way that my own mind works, I'm heavily and irreversibly, in a very positive way, influenced by magic, because the rate at which you must learn very abstract ideas, the end result of participating in all of the inner work and the traditions that you come into contact with is that you will become polymathic. You'll end up knowing a lot of things about different things. And by, a certain point in your life, you're probably going to be pretty sagely, um, which is a cool perk because what you end up finding is that you can learn a lot of very practical skills really, really quick. If you can manage to wire your brain to understand something like alchemy or the ancient sciences, you can probably wire your brain to learn a new language way quicker than the average person, or you can learn to fix your car within a matter of weeks, not months or years. So what ends up happening is on your learning process, you throw jet fuel, something like jet fuel onto that. And whereas one person would maybe have one life accomplishment, they would master one thing in the real world, say a craft, and they would be satisfied with that. They would be like, "Oh, yes. That's my magnum opus. That's my life's work." What ends up happening is that you can do that more than once. There's no reason why you cannot master more than one thing. Um, and you shouldn't rush it, but you probably will end up delving into so many different disciplines in such an intense manner with a curious mind that receives information and retains it. You can learn a lot of things quicker than another person who maybe never bothered with these practices.
You know, that's a really fancy and long way of saying that you fixed your car through gnosis.
No.
But
I fixed my car through Gnosis.
there is,
I fixed my computer through Gnosis. I built my desk through Gnosis.
I built my entire house in the country through gnosis. I just meditated for a long time and I just figured out how to frame it up.
I put that lumber together and I just knew, I understood.
I knew exactly how to
More or
pour the
less.
footing.
More or less, I think that's how they did it.
There is merit to that though, in the sense that magic, hermeticism, stuff like this, if practiced properly, you can achieve that same element of adaptability. I do believe, yeah.
Yeah, you'll adapt really quickly to life's circumstances in all kinds of ways. Man, like, I was literally drinking the last of my coffee when you said that. That's funny as fuck.
Almost make you spit out your coffee.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
drinking coffee. It's like at
they did the
9:30
thing.
over there.
Whatever.
Whatever, bro.
It was tasty. I drink coffee for the taste.
Base.
So have we missed any points?
Yes.
what
But worth it.
what have we what do we have yet to touch?
Well, a couple things I wanted to talk about, having to do with the sources or the compendium of sources. You asked me a question last time, uh, and I must have misheard you or something like that, because I thought you were referencing, or I thought you were asking about singular books, not complete compendiums worth of books. But at the same time, as I thought
Mm.
about this, I thought that like there really isn't there isn't that kind of hermetic Bible, uh, if I put it like that. That might.
Isn't there though?
I mean,
Oh
it's.
no, breaking up.
Oh, am I breaking up to you? Hello? Oh, hello? Oh, I think
Oh, are you kidding me?
that might be the end of Silas. Hey, can you hear me? I guess not. Well, while he's trying to figure out what's going on there, I'll move on. So my point here, right, is that there are a lot of different sources that you could look up. You could if you even if you were in like the 18th century or something, you could find books on books about books about books on books about whatever subject you wanted and think yourself into a hole.
I'm sorry, I lost connection for a moment.
Oh, are you back?
Yes, I'm back, but I did not hear a word of what you said.
Well, that's all right. It's not important.
No. Okay. I'll I'm sure I'll hear that once I
You'll hear it listening back to it,
yeah,
and I'm
I'll
sure you'll
listen
have
back.
something to say about it.
Yeah, I'll leave it in the comments section.
Um, but let's see here. Where was I?
You said that there were a couple of points. Did you have another one?
Well, you see, that's the thing. I actually have a lot of points, but deciding which one to actually talk about. Well, what about one of your points? Have you gone over everything?
I think I have, honestly, and I'll look one more time, and then I think we can just like answer a couple of questions from the comments.
Oh, that's right. We were going to do that, and we have
Yes.
around 10
Yeah.
minutes to do that, so that should be the next thing we do.
Why don't we get started on that then, and then I can cover that naturally. So I see someone left a chain of comments here, and that's like honestly really neat. I'll be honest, I haven't gone through it. I will, um, because it was relevant to what we were talking about. But it's frankly, it's so cool that somebody would spend that much time like participating in our subject and giving us this much context to work with. So I owe it to you to at least read this over. I think so. Thank you for leaving that. And the engagement, honestly, we were super ready for this to kind of get buried in the algorithm, and this is more a personal project than anything to fill our own time. And we were kind of self-interested when we started this, um, in just refining our own knowledge and how well we can articulate our own
Yeah,
ideas
that's
with
what I
each
was gonna
other.
say. This is all a project of articulation.
And people who were here for the very first um, incarnation of it, when we're messing up, making mistakes, and not as skilled as we probably will be in the future at public speaking like this. Thank you. And to start off with the comments, there was one that actually fascinated me that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully, you're here watching this episode, but Hieroglyphics asked, or he said, I think the concept of ego death is constantly reoccurring in my life. The ego doesn't just die one time. I've experienced ego deaths and ego resurrections. It's a process. So yeah, I wanted to talk about that because last episode we were talking about like what people think ego death is. The ego can't People say ego death is sort of a euphemism, but the ego can't die. If your ego is dead, you
You
are
are
dead.
dead. Yeah.
Yeah. And I say that very I say that very literally because your ego is the thing that gives you the basic survival instinct to eat. If you are hungry, you desire food, therefore you have an ego. And if you do not have any desire for something at the bare minimum food, you cannot stay here. You no longer are compatible with the physical world. So the fact that we are here talking about this shows that no matter how much we have our own ego sorted out, how well we do or we don't, um, we're all brought together by the fact that it is there and we can relate to it. And so I said last time that what people describe as ego death, I was being a little bit facetious when I said that a lot of people like take mushrooms and they
Yeah. Being a
realize,
bit
you know,
hyperbolic there. Yeah. Taking psychedelics and learning not to be an asshole.
right,
And I think
yeah,
I added to
learning
that.
not to be an asshole.
I added to that. I remember saying.
Say that again.
I remember saying in response to that. I think it was a little
Mhm.
later. I said, "Yeah, whenever you go through a psychedelically induced ego death, uh, the ego doesn't really die. In fact, you wake up the next morning completely sober with your ego. Uh,
And it's already
so I would
bad.
say the ego doesn't die; it wakes up again. It gets rendered unconscious, and I think in a way you need to knock the hell out of your ego at least once uh, in a kind of baptizing or rebirthing process.
Yeah, there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways to describe that process, and the the nature of it is. I honestly, this is an obsession that I think that a lot of modern mystics have something about the ego because of how it's blended with modern Buddhism or ancient Buddhism, I suppose, and Zen. There's a certain fixation that I wouldn't fixate on, a certain obsession with ridding yourself of the ego. You have to shed this. But what I said before, I said when you do that, when you do experience something that cuts you down and feels like an ego death, that I wouldn't say is an ego death. That's trimming the fingernail that is the ego. And that is a process that needs to happen again and again for pretty much as long as you live. You get better at it, but you're right. It absolutely is a process because it doesn't necessarily get resurrected. You just trim it and it grows back. And I wouldn't
Yeah, or you
fixate
knock it
so
out
much
and
on
it
trying
wakes
to
up.
rid yourself. Right. Would you rip out your fingernail? Would you take tweezers and just yank that thing out? No, you need it. And it's unnecessary pain that you put on yourself because somebody else tells you that it's something that needs to be gotten rid of. It's a filthy thing. Well, guess what? The narrative is that you don't need it, but in reality, it's not necessarily your enemy.
Well, just about like with everything else we were talking about this earlier with the televangelist and the fortune teller, everything is everything has that potential to be corrupted, or everything has that potential to be
Man,
dangerous.
can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Uh-oh. There he goes again.
This person left another comment. Says, I would love it if you talked about entities, ghosts, demons, angels, spirits, and how to open and close these doors of perception, what you should fear / caution with when experimenting with magic, and what to look out for. So I will say that there are things that you need to look out for, like be aware of, but like
Yeah, and these are
as
a
far
lot of
as
subjects that would be like split up into like different episodes, I imagine,
mhm,
because we
what
would
you
need to
should
like take the
caution.
time to talk about all of these things one by one.
Yeah. What you should caution with it, many things I think, but that's just with any discipline. You should be cautious that when you practice martial arts and you kick with your leg, you don't break your tendon. What you should fear? Absolutely nothing. Um, fear would
I mean,
probably
what
be
is
the
there
biggest
to really
setback.
fear? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wouldn't advise anyone to be fearful. That's how you start screwing stuff up. That's where the real danger is, I think. Um, Other than that, any danger is just perceived, perfectly manageable, or it's a trial that you're supposed to go through, and it's perfectly natural.
Yeah,
I'll
and
build on my car analogy.
mhm.
So you respect the car enough to know that if you drop it off of a stand while you're fixing it, it can crush you. And you're dealing with dangerous chemicals and oil. You probably shouldn't drink that. You probably shouldn't put this on your hands. But it doesn't mean that you're afraid of the car. You just need to make sure that you do it
There's a
right.
lot
There
of
are
common
processes.
sense judgments that you have to make. Yeah,
Yeah. Approach it with common sense, approach it with courage, with reasonable caution.
and
Um,
but I will say, someone who does have that fear in them, an incompetent or an insecure mystic, probably does more damage than someone who's intentionally being deceitful and manipulative.
yes, both to themselves and others. Um, yeah, yeah, I would say that's perfectly accurate to say. As for things like entities, ghosts, demons, angels, spirits, and even like what to look out for and how to do magic,
A lot of it's
um,
gassed up, honestly.
yeah, I mean, you're not going to be casting fireballs, I'm sorry to say, but that's not to say that
Unfortunately,
it's not the,
I
yeah,
won't do that too.
unfortunately. That's not to say that it's not the adventure of a lifetime and that things don't happen to you that will seem extraordinary. Um, but those will be covered in, if you stick around, more practical things like that and more fixated topics will be focused on in future episodes. And there's a lot to cover. So eventually we probably will be touching on those things that you wanted us to talk about. Um, but this is going to start moving at its own pace.
Yes, and I'm afraid now we'll have to cut it off since we are over 50 minutes now.
Excellent.
So do
All
you want
right.
to take us out with any outro, or you just want to end it here?
We'll end it here. I realized that the last time we did the intro, what I said was way too, I didn't mean for this to happen, but what I said was way too close to Esoterica's outro. I listened to it again. I'm like, oh, that's not
he
what I meant. That's not what I meant to do.
he plagiarizing over here.
I'm plagiarizing. And that's exactly what I'm trying not to do.
Yeah, we literally just talked about how we're not doing, trying not to do that.
Newcomers, intermediates, and adepts are welcome and may find value here. Even the intellectually curious are welcome to stay and explore these topics of knowledge with us. We'll get better at outros as we go.
Thank you, Esoterica. Very good.